4 years ago, Wolf? How about in 2000? How about next time around? He is pointing out one of the really major problems with all of this mail-out voting, where they just mail a ballot to every registered voter that can be harvested from apartment building lobbies and from retirement communities and homeless shelters and can be Xeroxed and on and on. And the piece in the New York Post earlier this week of a lifelong Democrat who went surreptitiously to the New York Post and explained how they've been stealing mail-in ballots for decades and gave away many of their methods, revealing that it's, of course, true. So, William Barr on mail-in ballots and potential problems.
This is a, sort of cheap talk to get around the fundamental problem, which is the bipartisan commission chaired by Jimmy Carter and James Baker said back in 2009 that mail-in voting is fraught with the risk of fraud and coercion.
But since then,
let me talk.
Yeah, please.
Let me talk.
And since then, there have been in the newspapers, in networks, academic studies saying it is open to fraud and coercion. The only time the narrative changed is after this administration came in. But elections that have been held with mail have found substantial fraud and coercion.
Not to put it, let me talk. How about, you see, they jump in. No, but the Democrat Party talking point is, and they cut you off and shout you down, and Barr was having none of it. And Wolf is not one of the greater offenders, but still jump in, step on what he's saying, and push in the Democrat Party's rebuttal rejoinder talking point, because that's how it goes. Then Wolf wants to argue about whether it's widespread or how widespread it is. I don't know, Wolf, is the Wuhan Red Death widespread? Is voter fraud widespread? Wolf Blitzer, William Barr.
There are individuals cases, but as far as widespread fraud, we haven't seen that since.
We haven't had the kind of widespread use of mail-in ballots as being proposed. We've had absentee ballots from people who request them from a specific address. Now what we're talking about is mailing them to everyone on the voter list when everyone knows those voter lists are inaccurate. People who should get them don't get them, which is what has been one of the major complaints in states that have tried this in municipal elections. And people who get them are not the right people. They're people who have replaced the previous occupant, and they can make them out. And sometimes multiple ballots come to the same address with a whole several generations of occupants. Do you think that's a way to run a vote?
Honestly. And do you think Wolf Blitzer, anybody else at CNN, can tell you about Carolyn Maloney's race in New York City? And most of them live in New York City. Some of them probably voted for Carolyn Maloney, some of them probably twice. And Carolyn Maloney, they had more than 400,000 mail-in ballots, and they disqualified 83,000 of them. More than 20% of them were disqualified. In a New Jersey race, it's a local race in Patterson, they disqualified more than 20, no, actually it was not more than 20, it was 19% of the mail-in ballots disqualified. In races where people win by margins of 2 and 3%. And then let's go to soundbite number 30. This is this guy, I was talking about it yesterday. Left-wing group funded by Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire. Their billionaires are good, other guy billionaires are bad. And his name is Josh Mendelson. He's a leftist, and he runs a group called Hawkfish, which I assume is a sexual reference. And he was on the television last night. What was this on? MSDNC, Michael? Oh, no, I'm sorry. You're right. This was HBO, because Axios is in bed with HBO, which is Time Warner, which owns CNN. But never mind that. So here's Josh Mendelson of Hawkfish, who runs this thing. And I was talking about it yesterday. They're saying, well, Trump is going to win in a landslide on election night. But we're going to keep counting votes days and days and weeks afterward until Joe Biden wins. And those are the mail-in ballots. You see, of course, in-person voting, Republicans are going to show up and vote on Election Day, because we call it Election Day, not Election Month. And Trump is going to win in a landslide in the Electoral College on Election Day, but then we're going to keep counting these mail-in ballots, some of them without postmarks and some of them without names and no signature matches, and then we're going to win. This is their plan. They've already announced it. Here is the Hawkfish CEO, Josh Mendelson, explaining how they're going to steal the presidential election.
The reason we talk about a red mirage is, in fact, because we believe that on election night, we're going to see Donald Trump in a stronger position than the reality actually is. We are sounding an alarm and saying that this is a very real possibility, that the data is going to show on election night an incredible victory for Donald Trump. That is likely to be what we see when every legitimate vote is tallied and we get to that final day, which will be someday after election day. It will, in fact, show that what happened on election night was exactly that, a mirage. It looked like Donald Trump was in the lead. And he fundamentally was not when every ballot gets counted.
This is how they have systematically corrupted the 2020 presidential election. And honestly, I was talking about this weeks ago, how Republicans are going to show up in person and vote, and Democrats aren't. They're going to mail it in, and mail-in is ripe for corruption, and William Barr is correct. There was a study done by a commission chaired by Jimmy Carter, of all people, and James A. Baker III, former Secretary of State, H.W. Bush administration, and so on. And they found that it is ripe with and rife with. It is that fraud is everywhere. William Barr on voter fraud.
Well, the only thing I'm saying is that so far we haven't seen widespread fraud. But
So far, we haven't tried it.
Well,
And the point is,
a lot of us. There are several states that only have mail-in voting, including a Republican
well,
state.
this is playing with fire. This is playing with fire. We're a very closely divided country here. And if people have to have confidence in the results of the election and the legitimacy of the government, and people trying to change the rules to this methodology, which, as a matter of logic, is very open to fraud and coercion.
Joe Biden is meeting with Blake's father today, with Blake Sr., and you got to learn a little more about what's going on here because the news media will not tell you about it. So they're talking about the police shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where the man, again, Blake, and it's terrible, he was shot 7 times. It's a terrible thing. But the police were called there because there was domestic violence taking place. There were women fighting, plus Mr. Blake, and Blake was involved in punching and fighting, and the women were punching and fighting and ripping and tearing. And it was going on for so long that a neighbor called the police, and then it went on for so much longer that the police actually arrived, and the police got out of their vehicles, and they went over and they tried to break it up. And then Mr. Blake attacked the police and assaulted the police, and then the police ordered him to stop and ordered him to drop the knife, and he ignored them and went around the car and opened the door and went in, and his children in the back seat. Well, maybe he should have thought of that, just saying. And then the police tragically, horribly, terribly shot him, and he was apparently shot 7 times. He's alive, but is expected to be paralyzed. He's paralyzed at least for now. So Wolf Blitzer, of course, wanted to get to the important stuff here, and because it's about race riots, and that's what the media is all about. Just don't call them riots, and on and on. So Wolf Blitzer and William Barr yesterday, and it went like this.
I'm not going to talk about the Blake case.
Why not?
Because I think it's different than the Floyd case.
What's different?
George Floyd case.
Floyd was already subdued, incapacitated, in handcuffs, and was not armed. In the Jacob case, he was in the midst of committing a felony, and he was armed. So that's a big difference. From the standpoint,
His family says he wasn't armed.
well, I think
There may have been a knife in the car, but he wasn't armed when he was shot.
well,
That's what his family and his lawyers say.
I stated what I believe is to be the difference.
Well, I say what I believe to be the difference. And see how they're the defense. They're always they're anti-police at every turn. The cops are the bad guys. Never mind. And again, there's a warrant out for him for a sexual assault, with a domestic abuse component, with multiple charges, and he's on the lam from the law. And on this day, while there's a warrant out for his arrest, domestic violence, and then somebody calls the police, I don't know who, neighbor or perhaps someone in the family, and so much time still goes by with the violence continuing that the police get there and the violence is continuing. The police tell them to stop, they don't stop. The police try to break it up. Jacob Blake attacks the police, assaults the police, has one of the police officers in a headlock. The police are yelling, drop the knife, while he's walking around the front end of the car. So how could they be yelling, drop the knife? Neighbor who made the initial video said that he heard the police yelling, drop the knife. So how is it that he's going to the car to get a knife and they're already yelling, drop the knife before he arrives at the driver's side of the car. None of this makes any sense. But our news people don't actually exercise any due diligence in this regard. They just go with whatever the Democrat Party talking points are, which are anti-police. They're an anti-police party. They're an anti-law and order party. They're pro-anarchy and chaos party. They're a pro-political violence party. And we know they remained silent for months while all this violence was going on. Silent for months. Remember, silence is violence? You know, if you're a white person and you're not, you gotta, yada, yada. All right, so here's William Barr. And again, well, why do so many police officers shoot so many unarmed black people? William Barr.
I don't think there are two justice systems. I think the narrative that that the police are on some epidemic of shooting unarmed black men is simply a false narrative, and also the narrative that that's based on race.
Right, and I went to the Washington Post database just to refresh my memory because it's always a good thing to do from time to time. In 2020, this is 2020 now for Democrats following along, so far this year, there have been 28 people shot and killed by the police. Hang on, let me clean this up. 28 people shot and killed by the police who were unarmed. 28 people shot and killed by the police in the United States who were unarmed, okay? And with thanks to the database, you can see that the Washington Post has 11 of those people were Caucasians. 9 of those people were African American. 3 Hispanic. 1 other. I don't see any Asians in here. Well, the Asians are not really holding up their end of the bargain here. And then I went to the, you can do this with the Washington Post database. We've tweeted this out a number of times to share with people, but it is findable, I guess. 11 white people have been shot and killed by the police so far this year while unarmed. 9 black people shot and killed by the police so far this year while unarmed. You can talk about the disparity in percentages of the population. Great, great. Then if you're going to do that and play statistics game at home, then you got to add in the number of homicides committed, let's say, by African Americans versus by Caucasians, of African Americans versus of Caucasians. And if you want to get into all that, then, knock yourself out. You can spend the next 3 weeks doing that. I went to the 11 white people killed by the police while unarmed so far this year. And then this database actually links to local news stories for the most part. That Hannah R. Pfizer, 25-year-old white woman, shot while in her vehicle, no weapon, in Sedalia, Missouri. 29-year-old Taylor Hayes, a white man, shot to death while unarmed in a vehicle in Sale Creek, Tennessee. I think it's Sale Creek. Nicholas Bills, 36-year-old white man, shot to death May 1st in San Diego, California. And the list goes on and on. Giuseppe Appendicanone, a 33-year-old white man, shot to death in Philadelphia while unarmed. The list goes on and on. There was a young man shot to death in his bed in Bethesda, Maryland earlier this year while police were serving a no-knock warrant. Sound familiar? This is, honestly, this goes on and on and on and on, and it's because we live in a country of 330 million people with 300 million guns and 700,000 police officers over 3.5 million square miles, and bad things happen because life will provide you with bad things. Not to dismiss these bad things, they're all horrible, terrible things, and they should be looked at, each and every one of them, very closely. It's something that happens pretty consistent. And as long as more white people are being shot and killed by the police while unarmed, and none of that seems to make Wolf Blitzer's radar, I just got to say I've got some questions about all that. So, aren't there two justice systems? No, there aren't. But the Washington Post also informed me about a year ago, they studied the Bureau of Justice Statistics numbers from the Department of Justice and concluded that when you look at firearms and homicides, that there were 151 homicides. Black people using guns. 151 per 1 million people. And for white people, there were 15 homicides, fewer than 10%. More than 10 times as many homicides with guns, black people with guns killing, and 1/10 of the number of white people murdering people with guns. Now, when you're a police officer and you're out on the street, you're probably vaguely aware of these realities.